Billions sacrifice their meager revenues for the great god of football.
Human traffickers are reportedly preying on the dreams of migrants to make money. That's according to Quartz, which says that many African migrants are approached by traffickers pretending to be soccer club representatives. They're able to lure young boys and men away from their families with promises of future superstardom. But the migrants are often left in a city with no money and no home.
No way, Brooke. I am not having a story on women's sports on this show. It's the natural enemy of ratings.
But they're yelling sexist and derogatory slurs at Aussie players.
Were making horrible comments and it was uncomfortable to hear. These are teenage girls and they were sexually objectifying them.
Unfortunately, this is not the only instance of sexism in football, with 66% of women working in the industry saying that they've experienced sexism in the workplace, and 89% not reporting it because they feel they wouldn't be taken seriously.
This is no longer football or sports problem. This is a societal and global problem, and the cause of it needs to be addressed.
Equal pay! Equal pay! Equal pay!
Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel here. I'm Red Lavender here, and today I'm back with another anti-capitalism true crime deep dive video topic. Today I want to do another sports video. I want to do the pure evil files of the soccer industry and the Major League Soccer files. Deep dive, capitalism, human trafficking, racism, verbal abuse, youth sports, history of, football, aka soccer, etc. So let's get started in this YouTube video topic. But before we get started, all my YouTube videos that are related to this topic will be on the screen right now. If you'd like to check them out, they're on my channel. So let's get started into this YouTube video topic. Star footballers, aka soccer players, are some of the most popular athletes on the planet and in this world. They undoubtedly deserve to be well compensated for their hard work, and money is much better off in their pockets than in those of the capitalist pig owners of these sports teams, sponsors, or corrupt institutions. The evolution of ownership and investment in football has seen clubs transition from communities, entities to global assets, making fans nothing more than customers, and even those who support teams from afar have been shortchanged by all of this. Broadcasting bidding wars means that you need a handful of increasingly expensive streaming services just to watch your squad play, whether the club you support is owned by a foreign sovereign state or a friendly local evil capitalist pig billionaire. How capitalism changed football for the worse. English football took its lead from the 1983 move by the Football Association allowing clubs to invade a rule that prohibited directors from being paid. The move effectively gave the go-ahead for clubs to float the stock exchange, providing shareholders with a rich and immediate dividend. But the truly seminal moment came from 1992, when the country's top 22 clubs formed a breakaway division and cut unprecedented deal with a Rupert Murdoch's Sky B for TV rights. It gave rise to a flow of money in the top of the sport, which, due to the country's insatiable appetite for televised live football games, has only increased with each new contract. In 1992, Sky paid the league £61 million a year to show live games. In the last count, the division broadcast rights were valued at $3 billion per season. The age of English football capitalism, with the division's wealth attracting the planet's best players, and in turn, catching the eye of the planet's richest men and billionaires, kickstarting an era where England football clubs would become akin to Kingston penthouse status symbols sold off to the highest bidder. In the years since, football's boardrooms have played host to all manner of ego trippers and assist strippers, and 17 years from Alvic's arrival, almost every club in the division has a new owner. Most of them are billionaires. Broadcast revenues are paid out to all 20 top-flight clubs, weighed generously towards the ones at the top. There is no obligation for the division to support the leagues beneath it, and so the only money that gets paid downward is in the form of parachuting payments to the clubs that have just been regaling way back in. The myth of competitiveness is sustained by the occasional outliner events like the Wigan's FA Cup victory and Lancaster's 5,000-1 title win, but they are fewer and farther between, and the mask is starting to slip. It's slipping. Outside the Premier League and outside the big cities, where treading water does not pay so lavishly, the specter of financial oblivion is getting ever more real. More than a quarter of clubs in the 3 divisions below the Premier League have faced bankruptcy or dwindling up petitions in recent years. This threat will be compounded immensely by the coronavirus crisis, which has robbed similar clubs of the match day earnings in which they utterly depend on. In 1988, around the same time that soccer was introduced to Brazil by upper-class British people, it became the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery. After importing approximately 40% of the African people who were kidnapped and shipped abroad into the Americas during that era, the post-abolition government subsidized a racial miscegenation program known as Brinco whitening that brought an influx of working-class immigrants from various European countries to Brazil in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These white European laborers introduced Brazil's black and brown working class to what soccer icon Pelé would later call the beautiful game. For years, soccer in Brazil has been enjoyed by almost exclusively by wealthy, mostly British elites, but the sport simply made it accessible activity for the poor laborers with little disposable income. The formation of the recreational clubs and leagues in the early 20th century was encouraged and sometimes financially supported by employers who were happy to have their workers playing and watching soccer rather than organizing with the radical socialist and anarchist groups that were emerging around that time period. Soccer rapidly became the country's national pastime. The 1923, more than 2 decades before Jackie Robinson broke the color line in American baseball, the Vasco da Gama Soccer Club in Rio de Janeiro fielded a team consisting primarily of black and mixed-race athletes. The squad went on to win the city championship that year, breaking the color line in the Brazilian soccer with emphasis. The 1948 assassination of the Colombian populist liberal politician George Encler Gapin and the ensuing riots, which decimated the city capital and killed thousands of people, ultimately leading to decades of bloody internal conflict. It was no coincidence that the 2 players most scapegoated were dark-skinned. Many Brazilians, especially the white European elite, had long felt that mixed-race compensation of their society had somewhat impeded the country's political and economic progress. For them, the 1950 loss confirmed that race was even hampering the country's potential athletic greatness. In June 2013, the infamous apolitical Pelé called on Brazilians to forget the anti-cup protests occurring at that time and to support the national soccer team. Many Brazilians were outraged. Romero said at the time, Pelé had no fucking awareness what was going on in this country. Even Pelé's more recent condemnations of the government World Cup participations failed to recognize both the sources and the scope of the country's many problems. Still, the Washington consensus-style neoliberalization forced on Brazil had already exposed many elements of its economy to the pressures of globalized capitalism, including its beloved national pastime soccer. Only half the players on the 1994 roster and only 3 of the starting 11 played professionally for the Brazilian club teams. The rest played in European leagues, which paid much higher wages. At the time, professional soccer was also becoming less accessible to the average Brazilian. Workers' wages were stagnating as the price of admission to local matches rose, and many players were forced to work second jobs to supplement their tiny salaries and incomes. As the multi-billion-dollar capitalist bonanza of the World Cup plays out, pay close attention to the movements opposed to what the World Cup symbolizes for so many Brazilians: exploitation, enduring racism, and the ongoing criminalization of the poor. The ruling class relies on racism and other forms of oppression in order to divide and distract the working class and to conquer them, to dissipate and deflect the anger that would otherwise be aimed at the establishment and the capitalist pigs. How rabid capitalism sink United States' Women's World Cup campaign. U.S. youth soccer is an expensive playground, and the number of players is stagnant or even dropping. Parents and their children might have many goals from athletes. Some want to participate, some dream of college scholarships, others hope to make it big in professional sports. But this much is very certain. In Las Vegas and across the country, satisfying those dreams, might say exploiting them, has become very big capitalism businesses. And parents are finding themselves shilling out fortunes to support their kids in sports. From the minute a child enrolls in a sport, it can feel like the meter is running at $100 a minute. Take youth soccer, for instance, where one Las Vegas family said it pays $995 annually to participate with a local club, $75 in monthly coaching fees, $400 for uniforms, and another $125 for cleats, and $100 entry fee per tournament. They played in 6 tournaments alone this year, including those hosted out of the state. The travel to those events could be $1,000 or more, depending on if it is done by car or air, and those parents, like many across the city and country, are doing it all for both of their children. The club also offers private training, the family said, which can cost $120 an hour, but that's where they drew the line because they're already spending more than $10,000 a year for each child to compete. It's not only soccer. We spoke to families who have children enrolled in youth baseball, football, gymnastics, and volleyball who detailed similar costs. We found thousands of Las Vegas families spending more than $1,000 a month, if not more, in an arms race to outfit children and give them training to compete in the sports. One parent described the constant costs like having an extra car payment. Another said they had a credit card specifically for youth sports, and admits the card often carries a balance. The chances for a college scholarship also seem slim. Roger Tabor, the president of Downtown Las Vegas Soccer Club, says the economic divide is most obvious in girls' soccer. It's hard to attract girls to our teams, he says, of his downtown-based program, because it's become a suburban, white-bread sport. Even worse, the stress from playing these youth sports is leading to a mental health crisis and problems for teens, whose potential personal value has become measured on what they can accomplish in these sports, or if they can receive praise from a coach. Add to that the pressure of knowing that your parents are paying a massive fortune to support you in these sports. Combined, it's a toxic formula for a crisis in a child that can manifest in problematic ways such as moods, anxiety, eating disorders, and substance abuse, and much more. What is football soccer trafficking? In short, football soccer trafficking refers to the human trafficking and exploitation of minors, people under the age of 18, from one country to another, under the pretense that they'll receive lucrative sports deals, opportunities. The most common mechanism of this type of trafficking is usually the transfer of players, once again, that are under 18 years of age, between third world countries and poor regions, such as in Africa or South America, to developed and football-rich European countries such as France and Italy. The literacy rates in South American and African countries, for example, are really low, and many youth players and their parents are really uneducated due to that. Hence, they are unaware that the signs that will indicate they are being exploited, and they are often targeted by people who are considered as fake agents or other unlicensed or unregulated representatives, sometimes referred to as managers. In African countries, these individuals can claim to have legitimate links with clubs in Europe, will promise a player an opportunity to trial with them and have a successful career in the sport. The agents are usually employed as part of an underworld organization in soccer that has a vast network that profits from exploiting youth footballers in this way. The managers will forge passports, visas, letters, and other documents, as well as offering gifts such as football boots and clothing in order to gain the trust of the families and build up an image of themselves as reputable and legitimate, and in some extreme cases has been known to Photoshop images to show the player that appears to be them with famous footballers and managers to entice the player in question and their family. Further, for many in these regions, the temptation of a football career in Europe is often too great to resist, and families often believe that they are making the move to Europe in pursuit of these promises the fake agent has made. That'll mean that the player can send back money back to his family and will escape the life of poverty and struggle in their country. This scam materializes when it comes to moving to Europe, and the agent asks the family for money to transport the player for opportunity, and the sad reality is that the families may sometimes sell their land or use any means possible to raise money, or even the surrounding community will contribute to generate the necessary funds to help the player chase the dream they are being promised. What happens next can vary, but there are usually the following possible outcomes. The first way that this meaninglessness is a player that never gets anything in return for the money they paid to pay the scam agent before they disappear, and the player is unable to retrieve money that themselves, their family, and other supporters raised in order to pursue their dream that was sold to them by the so-called fake agent in some cases. The player will actually be shipped over to Europe by whatever means they are able to afford from the money given to the agent. This can often be thousands of dollars, but may be as treacherous as having to cross with refugees and migrants on small and dangerous rafts. Then either once a team player has arrived in Europe, there might be someone waiting for them to look after them. It usually becomes apparent that there is either no trial or opportunity, or the trials that are given are with teams from lower divisions, and any money they ultimately make will be kept by the scam agents rather than benefiting themselves, aka pimping. That's basically what's going on. It's a pimp and the person they're pimping, basically. These associates that meet the player in Europe will usually house the players themselves and have numerous minors living with them who've entangled from their homes under the same false pretenses. However, as they associate the fake agent possess their documents, passports, and money, they're able to control them and continue to take money from them and exploit them. Kind of like a pimp. If the player is able to play at a higher level, the original fake agent and the associate will disappear to ensure that the operation is not made public. This is why these individuals are sometimes referred to as ghost agents, and will often return back to Africa or South America and find the next player to be trafficked and exploited. If no one there is there to meet with them, they will be left completely abandoned and forced to find their own way back home. This is usually in countries such as Cyprus, the Middle East, European countries, but also the main exit points from Africa, such as Addis Ababa and Ethiopia. For those that become stuck, they are minors, and this can make it very difficult for them to return home. Lack of finances, language barriers, and inability to access communication with their families, and embarrassment or shame can be factors that prevent these young youth players from being able to return to their home country. After this happens, many will end up homeless or will turn to a life of crime and criminality and may resort to that. In some cases, they will lose contact with their families and friends altogether. and their lives will be ruined by an agent that has scammed and exploited the player for their family. Another terrifying possibility is that when the player arrives in Europe, they will instead be exploited for various other options rather than low-level football or soccer trials. These can be criminal activities such as illegal gangs or even sex slavery or sex trafficking, and it can happen in almost any city in the world too. This is not a small problem, as the statistics show. In Africa alone, the average of over 6,000 players are trafficked to Europe every single year, according to Foot Solidaire. The majority of these are minors. The worldwide number stands around 15,000 minors are trafficked globally every year. Prevention and loopholes. Despite Article 19 of the FIFA RSTP explicitly prohibiting any activity of the exact nature that I have described in the previous section, the practice continues to be very prevalent in modern-day football, aka soccer. Violence and abuse, growing concern in men's soccer. Workplace safety is a growing concern for football players who are having to deal with flares and missiles being hurled from the stands, pitch invaders, and verbally abusive fans. The Global Players Union said football players complain that they often have to accept the racist aggression in silence rather than talk about it for fear of it might exacerbate the abuse or impact their overall job opportunities. Abuse can have serious repercussions, with 88% of unions saying the threat of violence leads to poor performance by players, and 83% saying it contributes to mental health issues such as depression. 98% of the unions reported that they would welcome increased use of technology and security scanners to catch the deter perpetrators, with 88 saying more should be done by the clubs to ban violent fans. The Colombian women's national football team has been plagued with sexual harassment and violence, as well as mismanagement and underpayment and wage theft. But the world soccer leaders have not followed through on their promise and commitment to help Colombian women athletes. Women's soccer operates under a corrupt system deeply seated in sexism and misogyny, and the men who wield power within that system have escaped consequences time and time again. Over the past several months, Colombia's best women's soccer players have wondered if they will represent their country at the Women's World Cup. Several of the country's most talented players have not been called up to play. Retribution for speaking out about the atrocities and capitalism conditions in the national team. Since 2015, active and former players, trainers, and their families have reported disturbing cases of sexual harassment, assault, and wage theft. In short, the men who run Colombian football teams have shown that their corruption and sexism overpower their desire to build a winning team. The awful treatment of Colombian girls and women within Colombian soccer has become commonplace. By unpacking the struggles between the players and the government bodies, we can better understand how misogyny and sexism thrives in global soccer. Things quickly unraveled for the Colombian women's soccer team. In September 2015, Montoya alerted the media that players had yet to receive any payments for the World Cup. She explained that each player had received an envelope with only $60 for their expenses during the tournament in Canada. In the months that followed, the players heard nothing more about prize money or compensation. Montoya told the press this is an ongoing issue with the federation, and she hinted that there were even worse problems. 6 months later, Montoya was inexplicably left off the roster for the 2016 Olympics. European soccer is having another reckoning over racism. It is time to accept the problem goes far beyond bad fans. After suffering months of racial abuse on the field and off, Brazilian soccer star Vinicius Jr. had had enough. On May 21st, 2023, the world Madrid forward, commonly seen as one of the best soccer players in the world, brought a halt a game at Benfica's Mestalla Stadium, pointing to fans who were making blatantly racist remarks and gestures. He made it clear that this was not an isolated incident. It was not the first time, nor the second time, nor the third time. Racism is the norm. Soccer has a long-established racism problem. Black players throughout the decades in history attest to both abuse by fans, monkey chants, and still common during games in parts of Europe, as well as more subtle forms of discrimination. such as being left out of national squads or overlooked by coaching positions, Black Brazilians such as Vinquist stretching back to Pele, have been subjected to racism both overseas and at home. Indeed, as soccer writer Frank Fort has pointed out, in the earlier days of Brazilian soccer, Black people were not allowed to play for professional clubs or for the national team. When they were finally accepted, some of the star Black players like Arthur Vendichowitz and Jodem Pradu would straighten their hair and attempt to lighten their skin tone in order to hoping of gaining popularity.